Alright, what's really going on? Today, we're going to take a look down the latest rabbit hole I've been going down with the jank that is Company of Heroes. I've got a lot to talk about this time, and it's a bit of a longer video, so there will be timestamps if you'd rather skip around. We're going to be talking about all things assault guns: traverse, rotation, accuracy, moving accuracy, and flanking. So let's get it. Many of you may have seen around the time of CoH3's release this video comparing the Brumbar from CoH3 to 2, and how 3's Brumbar seems to lack any traverse for its gun, resulting in it constantly rotating its hull to get on target, even when ordered to attack only slightly offline with the barrel. To illustrate this further, I went into each game and had an infantry model run around in front of a Stug 3. Here in CoH2, we can clearly see that I'm able to move this Pioneer quite a bit before he leaves the Stug's firing arc and causes it to rotate so that it can stay on target. Meanwhile, in CoH3, you can see every single little movement this scout does is causing the entire Stug to rotate its hull to stay on target, while the barrel stays totally static. This is the case whether he's further out or up close. The first issue that jumps to mind with the lack of traverse is in an instance like this, where the Stug cannot rotate because it's moving. This Chaffee is only slightly off to the right, but my reversing Stug can't traverse its barrel to fight back. You can actually see there is a tiny bit of barrel movement, but the Stug still refuses to fire until I change direction. This got me thinking about a thread posted on CoH2.org a few years ago, where a user called Sayonara wanted to test the tendency of a Jagdpanzer IV to fire its shot before it had finished rotating towards the target, resulting in reduced hit chance due to the movement penalties being applied during rotation. What they found seemed to prove that assault guns in CoH2 indeed had the movement penalty switched on while rotating, resulting in a much lower hit percentage compared to when they were totally stationary. So then I asked myself, are CoH3's self-propelled guns constantly inflicting a movement penalty on themselves, as their lack of barrel traverse causes them to rotate with every little movement their target does? So I ran some tests, and here's what I found. The first thing I did was recreate Sayonara's testing, just to verify for myself, though I'll be using a Kubel wagon for my target. While this stationary firing test plays, I'll quickly go over how accuracy works in CoH2 and, as far as I know, CoH3. Here is the weapon profile for the Jagdpanzer IV. Like every unit in Co, it has an accuracy value for near, mid, and far. Every unit also has a target size, which is sometimes called received accuracy in patch notes. You can think of it as how hard is it to hit this unit. And for reference, most infantry models have a target size of 1 until they vet up and become harder to hit. You find a unit's chance to hit by multiplying the accuracy it's using by the opposing unit's target size. This test is happening at what is considered mid for the JP4, so we multiply 0.05 by 14 and get a 70% chance to hit the Kubel wagon. However, that's not the end of the story, as we now have to look at how missing and scatter works in Co. When an attack rolls a hit, the hit is guaranteed no matter what, which is why you'll see shots that curve around walls or phase through terrain. Successful hit rolls on a unit's accuracy table will always hit, even if the visuals have to bend the rules of reality to make it so. When it comes to missing, we now have to look at the unit's scatter. Essentially, when a unit misses, the game rolls to see how the shot will scatter, and where on the ground in relation to the target the missed shot will land. Sometimes though, a missed shot will scatter into the target's hitbox anyway, resulting in the miss turning into a hit. This can range from landing just close enough to do a little bit of AoE damage to a miss being turned into a direct hit that does its full damage. So once you take into account how scatter works and how it sometimes will turn your misses into hits, we can expect most units to actually outperform their stated accuracy, as some of their misses will just hit anyways out of pure luck. With that explanation out of the way and the stationary test concluded, we move on to the moving/rotating accuracy test. The results of the stationary were above what we expected, showing how much scatter hits can add to the hit rate, and our results only slightly underperformed compared to Sayonara's, despite shooting at a much smaller target, meaning we had really good RNG. For the moving test, I recreated what Sayonara did, and had the JP4 fire a shot as it rotated its front across the Kubel. As you can hopefully see already, not only do we appear to be missing more, but you might be noticing how much further away some of the missed shots are landing. This is because, on top of a 50% penalty to accuracy, firing while moving also increases your scatter radius, meaning there's a lot less chance of a scatter turning into a hit. With that test wrapped up, the results come in at a 50% hit rate while rotating, a huge drop in performance similar to what Sayonara got as well, confirming to me that there is indeed an accuracy penalty being applied while the JP4 is rotating. I then ran my own new test just to verify for sure that the JP4 wasn't having any sort of penalty applied while stationary but traversing its gun, by moving the Kubel back and forth within its firing arc. We should, however, expect a decrease in performance still, due to the fact that since the Kubel is moving, misses will have a lower chance of scattering into the Kubel and becoming hits. Although, this also sometimes backfires, as the Kubel could move into a scattered shot that would have missed if it were staying still. Nevertheless, we should see a performance that is closer to the JP4's true mid-range stationary hit rate. And the results do end up reflecting that, giving us a 67% hit rate while stationary but traversing, the closest the JP4 has gotten so far to its 70% hit rate at this range. Here we are back in beautiful CoH3, ready to begin testing what's changed and what's the same. First things, I'm going to mention a few differences between my testing between the two games. In CoH3, I chose not to make the units invulnerable, because in 3's cheat mod, units do not play their hit animations while invulnerable. So to make it easier to tell the difference between a direct hit, a scatter hit, and a miss that lands close by, I kept the invuln turned off and just healed the Jeep back to full constantly. As a side effect though, since the Stug was doing damage, it would gain XP and vet up during the test. I didn't want this as the Stug 3 gains an accuracy buff at vet 1. So whenever the Stug gains a star, I would remove it and bring in a fresh Stug to continue the test. Lastly, I'll explain how I've been counting the shots. Misses that scatter into becoming direct hits and do their full damage are counted as hits. However, any shot that misses but lands close enough to inflict just a bit of AoE damage is counted as a miss. Here are the Stug 3's accuracy values. This engagement is happening at the Stug's maximum range, and here's the USF Jeep's target size. With that, we calculate a hit rate of 47.7% for the Stug 3. But we should expect it to do better to account for scatters that turn into hits. As we reach the end of the test, here are the results. A 62% hit rate against this Jeep while stationary, better than expected. I then ran into my first problem when it comes to CoH3's assault guns, and that is I couldn't consistently recreate the rotating test I used in CoH2, because the Stug's barrel rotates past the Jeep too quickly for it to complete its aim time and fire a shot, since it can't traverse to stay on target. So I had to come up with a different method. What I did was make a kind of racetrack for my Jeep, with an enemy Stug in the center. I try my best to keep the Jeep at the Stug's max range, though it is possible I dip into the mid-range band a couple times. I'm going to run this course 3 times, with a fresh Stug each time, and we should see, if CoH3 is applying the movement penalty to the rotating Stug, a much poorer performance compared to the stationary test. I was in for a surprise as I counted the shots and found that the Stugs in this test had actually outperformed their stationary accuracy. Even with good RNG, the lowered likelihood of scatter hitting a moving target, combined with a 50% moving accuracy penalty, should have made this extremely unlikely. The best explanation I could come up with was that my execution errors, plus the fact that the Stug was under no penalty, was how it managed to do better this time. With this, I was pretty convinced that rotating in CoH3 does not apply the movement penalty like it did in CoH2. But with that, I had to confirm that movement penalties still existed at all in this game. Now knowing that rotation doesn't affect accuracy, I had to see the Stug's performance when it was actually moving forwards and backwards. So I had it move command towards this Jeep and counted the shot it would fire as it reached the green line. I would then order the Stug to reverse and count the shot it made while moving backwards, and the result should be immediately apparent. When actually in motion, the Stug is not only missing most of its shots, you can see the wider scatter radius resulting in not a single direct hit yet. This was in line with what I expected out of a vehicle firing at its max range while on the move. So with this test finished, I felt safe in saying that moving accuracy penalties still exist in CoH3. It's just they're no longer turned on while a vehicle rotates in place. And despite lacking traverse on their barrels, self-propelled guns can actually more easily and accurately track and hit moving targets compared to CoH2, due to the fact that they no longer invoke an accuracy penalty while rotating in place, combined with their faster overall rotation speed. But as I was doing this, another thing began to dawn on me from the many hours I had spent staring at assault guns. Part 2. CoH3 assault guns rotate really fast.
Infantry missing in action. Resume dead.
Seriously though, I know plenty of people have pointed this out already, but I really want to put into perspective just how fast it is. Look at this. I have a Stug and a Panzer IV side by side, while an invulnerable M8 runs circles around them. The Stug is able to rotate its entire hull to track the M8 just as fast as the Panzer IV can rotate its turret. Essentially, this makes a stationary assault gun no different from a stationary tank when it comes to defending itself against a unit trying to get around its flank. You can also kind of see the lack of any accuracy penalty for rotating in place, as the Stug is hitting the M8 with roughly the same frequency as the Panzer IV, which isn't moving its hull at all. In fact, this makes the Stug better than the Panzer IV in some scenarios, because it will always keep its frontal armor facing its target versus the P4, which keeps its hull pointed in the same way and just rotates the turret. This then prompted me to go back into Company of Heroes 2 and record a comparison. So I recreated a tactic we've probably all seen and done during our time playing Co. Circle strafing an assault gun or tank with a slow turret traverse, with a lighter, more nimble vehicle. As you can see, my T-70 is able to dive past this lone Stug's firing arc and circle to its rear faster than it can rotate its hull to track the T-70. Now with some very easy to do micro that I'm doing quite poorly, I can chip away at this tank until my opponent either brings up reinforcements or just tries to escape the situation altogether. You could even pull this off with the more clunky medium tanks like the T-34 and consistently make it dangerous for your opponent to leave their casemate vehicles alone and unsupported. The mighty Jagdtiger was no exception to this either, as without support, almost any vehicle with a turret could get behind it and chip away at its health if it was caught out of position and unprotected. I wanted to test the viability of circle strafing in CoH3 against these turnstile mounted assault guns. The first issue I ran into was CoH3's pathing. Vehicles tend to get confused if you give them move commands too close to another vehicle, as they seem to constantly want to update their path to account for the enemy vehicle's position, because they can no longer clip or phase through each other. I tried again, but this time with CoH3's pathing in mind, and kept a little more distance from the Stug. Here's a great video by Tightrope going into more detail about vehicle movement and pathing in CoH3. But even keeping this in mind, the Chaffee can't move faster than the Stug's rotation and gets destroyed pretty easily. I tried again with the M8 because it has a bit better mobility than the Chaffee. However, the results still end up being about the same. My next test was to see if coming in from a flank would give me enough free damage before the Stug could come around. The Stug begins rotating as I come into sight and range. The Chaffee does get the first shot, but it misses, and now the Stug has locked on, and my Chaffee won't be able to get past the barrel because of how quickly it can stay on me with its rotation. Even if that first shot had hit, the health difference here shows that the Chaffee would have still lost. Lastly, I test coming in from the rear. My first shot once again fails to do damage, but the Chaffee does get off 2 good hits before the Stug is able to rotate on, and now the Chaffee is able to win, but just barely. I quickly wanted to test this with the DAC Martyr 3, as it's been all the rage of the DAC meta right now, alongside the 8-Rad. Fog of War is on, and the Martyr doesn't have spotters, so it can't fire until the Chaffee comes within its own sight, meaning the Martyr can't use its range advantage, and they both fired their first shots at the same time. But it doesn't matter, and the Martyr wins. Coming in from the side, however, now that the Chaffee can get a shot in first, this swings the fight into its favor, though it still ends up taking heavy damage. Okay, last set of clips guys, I promise, but I just wanted to show something else really quick. Unlike in previous games, where in this kind of 1v1 fight between a Sherman and a Stug, you would want to try moving the Sherman to get around to the Stug's flank, in CoH3, it's actually just better to park your Sherman at point blank range and let them blast each other to death. This is because, this way, at least you'll keep the Sherman's front armor facing the Stug, increasing your chance of getting bounces. Whereas if you try to get around the Stug, it'll just rotate in place, keeping its frontal armor always facing its target, while getting to fire into the Sherman's side. Alright, and that does it for my talk about assault guns. Thank you to anyone still here at the end of the video. I really do appreciate it. I never expected that suppression video to pop off the way it did, and so for this topic I wanted to put in a bit more effort, and I hope it shows. As for my personal opinion on the state of assault guns in CoH3, I do think barrel traverse needs to be put back in, and the rotation needs to be slowed down. If not for any other reason, then it just currently looks ugly the way it is. But I also want Stugs to be good, so I think I'd be okay with moving accuracy not applying during rotation anymore. As of editing this in April of 2023, I just saw that Relic has announced a live stream for an upcoming balance patch. I was planning on the next video being about a bunch of behaviors that I hope are unintentional, some of which you're seeing on screen right now, but we'll see if any get addressed, and I'll remove or add to my list of grievances accordingly. Until then, friends, thank you so much for your attention.